Fellowship of the Great Physician welcomes you to House Call. Our hosts today are doctors of chiropractic, Dr. Gerald Lala and Dr. Richard Jensen, who is also a board-certified acupuncturist, practiced independently in Shoreview, Minnesota. Let's join our hosts for today's program that will assist you in your quest for optimum health and well-being.
Welcome to House Call. I'm Dr. Gerald Lala.
And I'm Dr. Richard Jensen.
It's great to have you with us. We're going to have a good time today. Next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be just really positive, probably going to talk about some things that maybe you haven't heard about before, maybe you've heard a tiny bit about, but not adequate to fully understand and get the value from it. We're going to talk about finding the real causes of health problems, and you can do it. I hope you all say, I can do it. You really can. And we're going to talk today about determining your individual biochemical nature. So I'm only 44 years old, of course, so I have brown eyes and dark hair. I'm 6'2", and that's my individual biochemical nature. No, it's not really. So even though Dr. Jensen and I are very close in age, we still have an individual biochemical nature. How do we determine what our individual biochemical nature is? Well, one of the things we're going to talk about today is an organic acid profile, because it gives us an internal picture of our body very simply, very inexpensively. Therefore, it gives us an idea of, am I getting too much of one thing or not of another? It also gives us an idea of maybe what vitamins or minerals or nutraceuticals or homeopathic remedies we might need. So let's have Dr. Jensen be more specific than me about that and what is an organic acid profile. And also, yes, you're welcome, all of those of you from Europe and Russia and China. You're welcome to come to Minnesota and give us the big wave. And remember, Shoreview, Minnesota, it's the most beautiful part of the state of Minnesota. It happens to be the chiropractic capital of natural health care. And it is the gateway to the North Coast of America.
North Coast of America, there
we go.
The
North Coast of America. It really is, and it's only about an hour and a half, if you're going the speed limit, from our clinic to the North Coast of America, which starts at Duluth, Minnesota, Superior, Wisconsin. And so, and there is a difference between Superior, Wisconsin and Duluth, right?
Yes.
A slight accent different, because they eat more cheese over in Wisconsin than we do over here in Minnesota.
Right.
So it changes our vocal cords. So what is an organic acid profile? What does it do, Dr. Jensen?
Well, first of all, we want to look at that, why do we test? This is to determine your individual internal biochemical nature. Because we're all different. We're all different by our DNA, by how we absorb things, by how we process things. Though we're the same, we're also different, and so we need to categorize those.
And what's interesting is Minnesota people are different better. Everyone's different, but we're in Minnesota.
We're better.
We're better.
Oh, okay. Ooh. There's fighting words, I guess, huh? Okay, so what is an organic acid profile? Well, it determines the internal activities or markers of the amino acids, of minerals, probiotics that we might have. It determines internal activities or markers of vitamins, as well as antibiotics that we may be taking.
And so what are amino acids?
Amino acids are the building blocks of our proteins, okay? It's a building block of protein, period.
So my DNA is inside of there, right?
Yep.
And my RNA is inside of there.
Your RNA.
And my double helix is inside of there.
Well, let's look at it this way. All your connective tissue is made of protein, okay? And if we removed every other tissue in your body, every other tissue, including blood, muscle, fat, everything else, we would still be able to recognize you as you, just from that connective tissue. So when we're looking at you, we're looking at protein.
So
We're
a
looking at
person-
expression of protein.
So if I want to know the activity of amino acids or proteins in my body, of the activities of minerals in my body or electrolytes, probiotics, the good bacteria, of the activities of vitamins going on in my body, the activities of antibodies going in my body, I can determine that through this simple test.
Through this test. It's a great test for looking at a broad spectrum of areas, and may tell us where to look elsewhere to get a more specific look.
Does it determine
But
any
it's
other
a great screening kind of test.
screening test?
Great screening test.
Non-invasive screening test.
Non-invasive.
And does it check any other functions, internal functions of my body?
Sure, we're going to look at your oxidative stress, and therefore also looking at coenzyme Q10, its activity in your body, the antioxidants, which is also from oxidative stress, yeast and fungus, as in what chemicals is your body processing that are not created from your body, but created by other things in your body, other organisms that are not necessarily characterized as you, and that you're dealing with, such as the free radicals from yeast and bacteria, toxins that yeast and bacteria, instead of dealing with it themselves, give it up to their environment, which is us, that we have to deal with it. Bacteria, and what it has to do with that. So it's going to look at that. We're going to look at the fatty acids.
Their functions of fatty
The
acids?
functions of fatty acids in your body, and by how those fatty acids are built up in your body, it may show us the internal communication of your body, or what is keeping that internal communication from working its way, such as things like diabetes, where we talk about insensitivity to insulin. Has greatly to do with the kinds of fat that are found in the cell structure of our body. So it tells us that.
So then that leads us to the question, what are markers?
What are markers? Okay.
Markers are chemical indicators formed as products of various microbes and metabolic end products, in other words, combustion, the end products of internal biochemical combustion and biochemical functions. So there are a lot of different markers. We can find them in blood, in urine, in hair, and in saliva. These are all markers. So blood markers then indicate internal biochemical functions from the blood. Urine markers are accumulations of end products that can be traced to inherited or acquired enzyme deficiencies, the buildup of toxicants, poisons in other words, specific nutritional deficiencies, and the effects of drugs. Now, Dr. Jensen has a beautiful slide here that's going to, I think, help illustrate about how the body gets sick or how we can reverse it and get it healthy.
Okay. So if we bring up this slide, as I thank you for doing, we have here across the top part of the slide, here we go. Here we have the toxicity, broken barrels of toxins that get into the ground, and that can get into our food byproducts, our agriculture, and absorbed into that, as well as absorbed into our livestock that we have out there if we're not careful. That's why a lot of times we look at organic things. We look at the kinds of food we eat, and a lot of cases we're going for the quick fix, which is the fast foods, okay? And we look at the toxins that are created by our industry, and all these things make up our environment. And really, what is life? Life is being able to respond to our environment, and in this case, our environment is getting beyond what we can react to in many ways. If you look at it, I don't care if you look at it from a creation or an evolution point of view, that our body has been around for a long time and has been working with substances in the natural environment, all except for maybe the last 100 years. And since this industrial revolution, and in modern times, we create like some 35,000 new chemicals each year for the body they have to deal with that get into our environment. So we're looking at how that affects us. Now, as that comes into us, it goes down to our gastrointestinal tract, and it's dumped over into our liver. Now, our liver tries to detoxify this by trying to make these toxins water soluble. And so it goes through phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Phase 1 detoxification actually makes us more toxic. It has more toxic byproducts, which then go over into phase 2. And so if phase 2 is broken down, we end up more toxic than we were in part 1. But we have to go through both of them so as to make the body make these things water soluble and get excreted through our kidneys. Okay? But if that doesn't happen, then what happens is the body then stores these chemicals, usually within the fatty tissues, a lot of times within bone, and a lot of times it makes it into our brain and starts to build up in the brain. Things such as aluminum can go into the brain and start to cause some disease processes, one of which is known as Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. So it's a need to have to deal with these things, and being able to deal with them more efficiently is finding out what they are and removing them from our environment, or giving ourselves the types of things that allows us to deal with them much more efficiently.
So what then does the organic acid analysis analyze then?
Okay, so when we're looking at the body's metabolism of fat and of carbohydrates, as you saw on that list, it looks at the B-complex vitamins. It looks at our cellular energy and how that's working through metabolites of what we call the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle within our body, and cellular regulation that continues throughout that. And then there's also, it analyzes the activities of the neurotransmitters, of oxidative stress, of the toxins within the body, how that's being put through our body, bacterial infestation, and yeast and fungal overgrowths are also tested in here to show us what we need to address. Organic analysis also assesses our cardiovascular disease processes, primarily through methylation, which would look at homocysteine. And homocysteine is a 4 times greater risk factor than cholesterol alone. Okay, so when you're looking at that, you really want to look at your cardiovascular health, not only from lipids. You want to look at it from homocysteine, you want to look at it from inflammation, and you want to look at it from an oxidative stress point of view, because that causes that atherosclerosis to start also, as well as they're finding that your oxidative stress is what really begins the cardiovascular event happening from a heart fibrillation. So we're looking at that. We're looking at lipid profiling, which is your cholesterols, carbohydrates, coenzyme Q10, as we were talking about, and vitamin B12, other vitamins such as folic acid. Again, losing as a monitor some homocysteine and the methylation of your body. And methylation has a lot more to do with that also. If you want to look at methylation, we have a show out on the website. It's housecalltv.org. And so we have it on the bottom of the screen there. We have a show that's on methylation, so you can see what that's all about. Vitamin B6 and powerful endothelial risk factors as well. So endothelial cells are the kind of cells that you find throughout the membranes of, like, the inside of the mouth, through the esophagus, the gastrointestinal tract. Any mucous membranes are epithelial membranes. You're looking at the inside lining of your lungs, epithelial. You look at all your glandular tissues are epithelial tissues. So we're looking at, your pituitary gland, your adrenal glands, all these glands that secrete. Those are endothelial cells. And endothelial cells are such that they're almost a pluripotential cell in themselves, and that if you irritate them enough, they will become something different. And when you have a cell that becomes something different from what it's supposed to be, that's called cancer. And if it continues that way, we find that 90% of all cancers are endothelial cell cancer. Okay? So it's very important to monitor that particular cell's activity within your body. How about depression and anxiety, Dr. Lala?
Well, one of the issues, a lot of people are suffering with depression and anxiety, and they're often related to undiagnosed or misdiagnosed nutritional factors, including not proper evaluation of the levels of B6, vitamin B12, folic acid, and the electrolytes or minerals, particularly calcium, lithium, magnesium, the amino acids, especially the essential amino acids. We have two categories of amino acids in biochemistry. One are called essential and the other are called non-essential. And then the neurotransmitter serotonin. And bringing that up to issue now, Dr. Jensen is going to discuss the somatotrophic organization of our cerebellum, how it works and our thought processes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lala. When we look at the organization of our bodies in our brain and how it's interpreted, we have a slide here that shows you how that's mapped out in the brain, or in the cerebrum, which is the covering of the brain. And as we look at it, we have first these different areas of the brain. Back here is normally, in the occiput area, is normally sight. Okay? We look up here in the temporal lobe, that's hearing. Along in this shaded area here is normally speech and putting together of words. That's Broca's area. Then we look at the frontal area, which is how we decide and make goals and decision making, risk taking, all that kind of stuff is taking place up here. Back here on the side here, this is how we relate to the world around us, showing that we're separate from the world or not. And then we have the part that's about sensory of the body, and we're looking at the motor activity of the body, okay? And then this is where we decide to have motor activity in the body. So when we look at motor activity, we can see that the amounts or portion of this that are mapped out for each portion of the body. We have some for the foot, some for the foreleg, for the calf of the leg, for the hips and thighs, for the torso, for the arms, and then we have this incredible amount that's appropriated to the hand, so that we have a lot of motor dexterity in the hands, and therefore we would like that, particularly with our surgeons, to be able to move that quite well, and that allows us to write and things like that.
You better have a chiropractor who's got good hands too.
Yes. And then we look over here at the sensory part of the body. And the sensory part of the body, we have a little bit less. If you look between the motor part of the foot and the sensory part of the foot, there's less sensory in the foot and throughout the leg, the hips, the torso. And we come across, there's a disproportionate amount for the upper extremities. And then you look at the hand and the sensitivity that the hand has. So not only do we have a lot of motor dexterity with the hands, we also are very sensitive with our hands. And then we also look at the face here. Face and the mouth has a great portion of that, as well as motion over here.
So it brings up then the nervous system. So the brain then is like a main computer, the main power plant. The spinal cord then would be like the main power cord coming out.
And the switchboard.
And the spine is a switchboard in our nervous system. So
right.
That would be then our autonomic nervous system.
That would be, well, it's the three portions of our nervous system. Well, actually, there's three portions to our nervous system. There's the central nervous system, and there's peripheral nervous system. But then there's also voluntary and involuntary. And the involuntary is also separated into two parts, being sympathetic and parasympathetic, or fight or flight and rest and relaxation. And so when we look at this next diagram here, we're looking primarily at our involuntary nervous system and how it affects the different organs of our body. Such as, here we're looking at the eyes, at the face, but we're also looking at the glands within our body, say even our salivary glands. We're looking at the heart and the lungs and how they each are connected up here. And let's look at the heart, because through the cranial nerves, we're coming down and we're looking at the rest and relaxation. This is the parasympathetic nervous system and how it comes down to the heart. And that basically tells the heart to rest, or basically it just slows down the heartbeat, okay? And then we have from here, from the back here, from the spine, this is the sympathetic nervous system that primarily comes throughout the entire spine here. And that puts us into fight or flight, or tells our heartbeat to speed up. So there's a balance between these two that show whether our heart is fast or slow, and it can definitely change things that are subject to our cardiac stroke. Not that we're having a stroke, but that the stroke of how much blood is being put out changes our blood pressure from here. Now, one of the things that I find is here in our society, we work with a lot of stimulants, and stimulants actually stimulate this area, and these nerves also stimulate some of the muscles along here and will pull some of these bones out of place. So a lot of times I find that we have a slight misplacement of these bones, causing what we call a subluxation that changes the rate of the heart due to what we've eaten. So it's not just a mechanical change. How about if we're under stress? If we're under stress, it really turns these guys on, and therefore a lot of times subluxations in the spine is very mental also. It's what's going on between the ears can dictate that a great deal.
Well, I guess we could kind of switch channels here a little bit, and talk about one. We do appreciate all of your questions and comments that you send us on email and letters and telephone calls. And one of the things that people have asked us to do is talk a little bit about chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. What are the primary causes of it? Generally, that's due to a decreased function of the thyroid or the adrenal glands, an imbalance of what we call citric acids, imbalances in diet, eating foods that usually unbeknownst to the person they're hypersensitive to, which therefore causes what we refer to as toxic overload, and that of course is food sensitivities, which causes cellular dysfunction.
May I talk about that for a moment?
Sure.
Well, we look at all of these things that Dr. Lala just mentioned are actually stresses on the body. Okay? Looking at the citric acids and the toxic overloads, food sensitivities, and cellular dysfunction in there. And when we look at this, we look at stresses, or should I say distress on the body, one of the first things that it works on is our adrenal glands. And as our adrenal glands have been overstimulated, or should we say fatigued out, that starts to drop. And what our body does respond is to start by pumping out a little bit more thyroxine. It starts working on the thyroid gland. And then that wears out and it starts to go down too. So it could be that a lot of these things, chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, may be a natural progression from all this stress that's in society.
And of course, much of the overweight, which we're going to talk about here in a few seconds, is due to cellular dysfunction, where the body's hanging on to fluids. Because of toxicity. So let's talk about that. One of the other things people ask us about, what would be the primary thing that I would do if I had an overweight problem? What is one of the primary things we recommend to people? They've been through all kinds of diet programs, and usually the principal tests that we find to be the most advantageous to overweight people are what are called the IgG4 food sensitivity test, which another term for it is a cyclic food sensitivity test, or delayed food sensitivities, and then an IgG food sensitivity test, which measures immediate reactions. This, in part, we're talking in part about what we call then intestinal hyperpermeability, and what causes that. The intestines they become excessively permeable, allowing proteins and toxins and poisons to be absorbed into our blood where they shouldn't be. And it's usually due to what we call an antigen-antibody reaction. When I eat a food, or you eat a food that your body is hypersensitive to, there is a fight that's going to go on, and it's called an antigen-antibody reaction. And that then also throws off what we call the acid-alkaline pH within our intestinal system, not just our intestines, but throughout our body. And Dr. Jensen is going to show you a picture here now of how those intestines and the liver work.
Thank you, Dr. Lala. If we bring up that slide, we can see from their position. Up on the top here, we have the esophagus traveling down into the stomach along this way here. And in the stomach here, what we have is we have the acidity usually about 1 to 3. It usually stays around 2. It's due to hydrochloric acid that's given off in the stomach, and the acidity is used to help digest fats and proteins and start denaturing our minerals for absorption. That takes place. The minerals are absorbed in the first foot of the small intestine. So it has to happen very rapidly, and if the acidity here isn't there, you're not going to get it. Then you look at how the liver, here's attached to the liver, here you have the gallbladder, here we have another picture of the gallbladder, and how it attaches into the small intestine, and the pancreas, which is hidden here behind the stomach, attaches into the small intestine right through here. These things dump in about a quart a day of different enzymes and different materials to change the pH back, as well as digestive enzymes to help digest not only continued digestion of proteins and fats, but also carbohydrates that work in a more of an alkaline part. Now, the interesting thing is, because the acidity is very important here, this is our first defense on things going through this tube that introduces the outside world into the inside world to kill off some of these bacteria, yeast, protozoa, and fungi from there. And then digestion starts to take place in the small intestines. And of course, that's very, very much tied into our bloodstream. And so if you have holes in that intestinal tract, it'll introduce some of these food substances directly into our bloodstream in order to have an immune reaction to that. But one of the things is if we let an overgrowth, and these things are coming through the acidity here, we can have a change in balance of the natural flora between the bacteria that works with our body and the other substances that work against our body. Let's put it this way. We have bacteria that you rarely hear about vitamin K deficiencies. We have bacteria that manufacture vitamin K for us in a place where we can still absorb it.
That really then brings up the discussion of like cancer. What is really cancer due to? Well, it can be due to environment, it can be due to hereditary, but it is really chronic internal oxidative stress causing an accumulation of toxic chemicals which cause alterations in cells, leading to disease and metastasis. So that's oxidative stress then damages the amino acids or the DNA within our amino acids. That therefore then says to us we need to detoxify the body, not put more toxins into it, but detoxify it. And one of the major organs that has to be detoxified is the liver, as well as the gastrointestinal system. That becomes so important, as it's fine to have surgery. There's no issue with that. Maybe radiation is called for, maybe chemotherapy is called for, maybe a certain kind of drug therapy is called for. But the key is that there are alternative, scientifically proven, alternative issues that based on, in other words, we don't go and start a nutritional or metabolic program in somebody with cancer without doing our diagnostic workup. So we don't practice voodoo nutrition, which most, in my opinion, alternative health care in this country is, or wellness clinics. I think it's a lot of it's voodoo nutrition that's going on. But the key is that we look at that person's individual biochemical nature and then supplement their program. If they have a medical program, we can supplement that. We can coordinate that with their medical doctor, with their oncologist, and the person has a much greater likelihood of recovery, or at least extending their life in a healthy way rather than dying a miserable life. So look to good health. It's your right. It really is.